when you have single parent homes and children being abused in those homes, and then those kids, those seventh graders today are off having their own kids in 4 years from now, 5 years from now.
Yep.
It's an exponential math problem that I'm not sure how we're going to turn around. And I do think sometimes people make a mistake where they feel like they have to go out with this business plan and present it and go get a bunch of money from a bunch of people invested. And now you immediately have pressure.
Yep.
I didn't take any debt on, and I would much rather measure my success by how many generations can my family run this company. I would way rather hand my kids a $50 million knife company than $50 million cash.
Nice.
They have.
Welcome to Last in Line podcast, where we are highlighting, showcasing, and spotlighting great leaders of faith who have overcome adversity, cultivated resilience, and served others in a significant capacity. So settle in and be encouraged by this episode of Last in Line podcast. Hey, today we're welcoming Josh Smith, the founder and owner of Montana Knife Company, and many of you guys know who he is and have probably heard him on other podcasts. Josh is a native Montanan. He has been making knives for nearly 3 decades. He became a journeyman bladesmith at the age of 15, and 4 years later became the youngest master bladesmith at the time. And we talk about his journey of how he became a passionate knife maker, how his mentors in his life really poured into him and encouraged him to pursue that dream because he loved it so much and was really good at it. We're going to talk a lot about business. As you know, I like to go a little bit different path than a lot of the podcast hosts that have the bigger names. I like to get outside the box just a little bit. And Josh is not considering himself a religious, quote unquote, person. He seems to have been a little bit scarred by some past relationships in church and just seeing some of the hypocritical nature that is the buttoned up Christian who pretends to be something they're not. And so we talk a lot about that. We talk about growing pains and how growing really fast presents certain challenges, but it also is almost kind of what he expected, which I like to hear. He was all in on this dream. He was all in on building a team that was bought into the vision and the mission, and they want to make everyday working knives for the everyday working guy. And we talk about some of his new ventures, some of his new endeavors, that directions Montana Knife might go. He's got 3 daughters and a son, very outdoors family. He comes from a long line of hard workers and entrepreneurs. And I enjoyed this conversation. Josh is a great guy. As you see from outside looking in, you can tell he's a down-to-earth, he's an authentic, just a good old homegrown guy who isn't afraid of work, isn't afraid of taking risks, and he's not afraid of investing in the community and serving people, which fits right in to what we're about here. So I hope you enjoy this. You know where to find him. It's hard to get his knives, but he's working on that. So MontanaKnifeCompany.com, JoshSmithKnives.com, and you're going to love this conversation as much as I did. So welcome Josh Smith from Montana Knife Company to Last in Line podcast. Josh Smith, thank you for doing this today, and welcome to Last in Line podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, hey, so you've been on a rocket ship ride for a little bit, and it's hard to even believe that you're able to sit still for a second. I'm sure your email and phone and everything's blowing up because your company is exploding, and you're growing like crazy. I don't know if anybody could even account for some of that growth that you're seeing this quickly, but I want to dive into a lot of this, a lot of your company, a lot of your background. Before we do, though, you mind if I start off with just some unorthodox stuff? Because I've listened to several of your interviews, and they all kind of follow a pattern, of course. And but I want to maybe stand in a different spot of the line of the people that are talking to you. So let me run something quick by you here. A little weird, little outside the norm, but what I've asked people this before, but if you had a time capsule, what would you put in it besides one of your, I guess, signature favorite knives that you make? What would we find 100 years from now that would tell us the most about Josh Smith?
Boy, that's a good question. It's hard because I would probably put one of my, like one of my best custom knives in it. Because I've kind of said before, what's unique about being especially a custom knife maker is you're building something that's, quite frankly, a future artifact. There's going to be very little left in this world from today in 1,000 years. But there's a very good chance that even one of our MKC blades, definitely one of my customs, could end up, being in a museum or being something that somebody's still carrying or still has as a passed down family heirloom for, 20 generations. So it would probably be that if, I don't have this is kind of what I do. So I don't have a heck of a lot else other than a photo of my family. Cause I mean, outside of my company, my family's pretty much what I invest myself in. A lot of it's going to kids' sporting events and, different games and stuff like that. Maybe a photo of me and my kids out when we're hunting. I think that's probably the best time that I have with my children. That's the best memories that I have is when we're out in the field.
Yeah. Well, and I hear a lot about, the hunting community, which I am not necessarily part of, but I do fish a lot and used to fish a lot more than I do now. But the hunting community I watch from afar, and it's interesting to see how your knives are a staple now there, probably always have been. But you have kind of a prize kill besides the one behind you. I don't even know if that would be considered, but do you have kind of a prize kill that you have on your resume, and or maybe an hunting experience that stands out to you if there's one that's significant?
Yeah, I've got a few experiences. Honestly, I kind of set hunting aside for quite a while my kids were young. I just didn't get out as much as I'd like to. Honestly, I was so focused on my custom knife making business back then of just making a living. But there'll never be a head on the wall or real proof of this other than some photos and some video. But probably one of my favorite experiences was, I shot a cow elk with a bow, but my boy was with me and he was 5. And that experience was super, super cool. Just because he got to experience that whole seeing the elk coming in, the elk being all around us and shooting an elk.
Yeah. Wow.
Again, nothing really to do with the quote unquote trophy, just more of the experience. Every other experience that I've had that I would rate in my top 5 are all stuff that has to do with my kids. When my boy shot his first buck, my daughter, when she shot her first bull elk on opening morning when she was 12, my son, when he shot a bear this year, I wasn't even with him. He shot a bear this year with his bow and he's 14. Wow. And he was by himself in the woods. And he shot a bear at 10 yards. So when my boy shot his first bear with his rifle, he was 12, and we put an epic stalk on 1.5 mile, hike down through a creek bottom and back up 1,200 feet in elevation to sneak in within 80 yards and shoot a bear in the pouring rain, miserable hunting conditions.
That's awesome.
So every one of those is actually really about my kids' success, other than I guess the cow when I shot it, but it was more about having my kids with me. This deer on the wall I shot in Arizona was probably my best ever hunt of my own, where I best from the standpoint of like what I did. I started stalking that deer from a little over 1.5 miles away. Didn't know where he was at once I got up in there. And after a couple hours of stalking in, I found them. They were bedded, stood frozen for about 30 minutes, and then came to full draw when they started to get up from their beds. And I shot that buck at 30 yards with my bow. That was definitely a tough, spot and stalk archery mule deer in Arizona is hard to do.
That's hard. Yeah, that one probably takes the cake as far as tactic and skill that you had to have to pull that off. The bear with the bow with your son, that might top the list for me. Just hearing that, that's really cool. That's going to stand out in his life forever. Well, so I will tell you, just because you don't know a lot about us in the podcast, unless you did some research. I can't imagine you having time for that, but we're a 99.9% Christian men audience. Okay. It's a faith podcast. We talk a lot about faith in God and just spirituality and things like that. But we also talk a lot about man stuff and, outdoors, ruggedness, guys staying in physical shape, guys leading their homes like they should. And I know you might, have an opinion because I've heard you on some other folks like Ryan Mickler's podcast and different guys that I know. What's your assessment of culture right now, and just kind of where we're landing on the radar as a collective group of men with solid values, solid morals, those kinds of things? Because there's not a real big place for us right now. What's your take on where society's trying to take this thing?
Boy, I could talk for 2 hours. With you not asking me another question. I'm going to take my coat off. I'm sitting here in the sun and I'm in this Everly stock puffy and
that question will get you. That question will get you heated up.
Yeah, I'm going to say I'm not getting sweaty, because I'm getting nervous. Yeah, so that one is a deep one. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a very religious guy in myself. I'm not. It's interesting because I'm not real super oriented towards faith or going to a church or religion or whatever. That being said, I actually get my hackles up sometimes when people get like overly religious with me.
Sure.
Especially I tried several times to go to churches, especially with my ex-wife, and a lot of the stuff we went to was all driven around basically church being a fundraiser. And it was less about the message and more about how much money can you guys give us. And I found a lot of people in a couple of the particular churches I went to very hypocritical. I saw them in bars and stuff, in the way that they acted in some of their business life and around town. And I see them the next morning, claiming to be pure. And it bothers me. That being said, I have an aunt who is probably the most religious person you'd ever meet, but she would never, ever ask you or force her particular beliefs or opinions on you. But if you spent an hour around her, you would just know, first of all, and second of all, she is absolutely a living and breathing example of how we should all be, frankly, as a human. Non-judgmental, leads by example, wears her kind of faith on her sleeve as far as you can tell. But that being said, if you're some Harley gang biker or whatever, she'd talk to you and she'd probably go home and pray for you. But she's not going to necessarily stand there on the street and try and convert you. That being said, if we all lived by the values that, frankly, most faiths preach, it would definitely be a better world. And it does make me wonder at times when I see what's happening in the world, as much as I'm not real religious myself, it does seem like the further we get away from that and the more of those values we let go, the shittier our society gets. I have to be I'm somebody that gets pretty easily pissed off and upset and can get really fired up when I read too much bad news about everything that's going on and the way our world is with how woke it is. And I personally believe, in marriage between being a man and a woman, and I
Right.
believe in family values, and my family is the most important thing to me. I believe in raising good kids. Quite frankly, I believe in spanking your kids when they screw up.
That's right.
I'm a very black and white person when it comes to that, though I'm definitely imperfect myself. And I think I think everybody right now is looking to someone else, whether it's a celebrity or the government or a pastor, to fix everything that's going on. And the only way that we're going to turn this thing around is if we're going to do a better job parenting ourselves. Like, we have to change it within the home. You can pass all the welfare programs you want. The churches can raise as much money and try to convert as many people, or to build shelters, or do it. I don't care what it is. So Joe Rogan could give every dollar he's ever made away and the rest of his money. When you have single parent homes and children being abused in those homes, and then those kids, those seventh graders today are off having their own kids in 4 years from now, 5 years from now. It's an exponential math problem that I'm not sure how we're going to turn around. And that's why I tend to actually I feel like I'm fairly educated about what's happening today, but I also find myself saying a lot of times, like, no, I didn't hear about that. No, I didn't know about that. Because I purposely sometimes keep the news off. I bury my head a little bit in the sand, and I do the best job raising my own kids and family I can, being the best employer I can, and build the best company that I can. Because honestly, the rest of that stuff, a lot of it I can't control, and I'll let it eat me up. Every now and then my wife, my wife's definitely more on the faith side, but she'll listen to too much Ben Shapiro, and sometimes I'm like, all right, babe, we got to turn off Ben for a week, because she'll get all fired up. And
I'm with you. I'm glad you said that, because sometimes I feel like I might be accused of burying my head in the sand on some of this, but I think it's just a selective choice I'm making to not listen to the crap. And because you can find whatever narrative you're trying to look for, you can find it. And I can't. I haven't watched the news in years. But no, to your point on faith, I 100% agree. And I've had some bad experiences in church. I've seen from a distance exactly what you just described. And I think, when we talk about good and evil, when we talk about values and morals and just good old fashioned, down home culture and character, good and evil was established back in those times. Like, that's how we got our matrix for understanding what good and evil is. And so those values come from trying to just be a good person and understanding that there are different people out there, and it's not our job really to change them. I guess it's our job to have some grace and to live an example that maybe they get curious about and want to follow. So I agree with what you said about the staying in the home too.
Yeah. And I'm a big believer. I'm not a real black and white person from the standpoint of, or I guess I kind of am black and white. I personally think there's a lot of people that go to church every single Sunday and pray for forgiveness that are going straight to hell the minute they die. And there's a lot of dudes that have never stepped foot in a church that are up logging and working hard every day, and they're coming home and they're having a few beers at night and they're watching football. But man, they're doing a great job loving and raising their kids morally and ethically. Teaching them the right way, teaching their kids how to hunt and fish and be, sustain their own life. And they would also be the first one to come help you or anyone else out that was in a bind. But they probably don't live the purest form of life, but really none of us do. Some of us just fake it better than others.
It's not about the building. I mean, I'm agreeing with you. It's not about the church building. And a lot of people get hung up on that's your yardstick for measuring how much of a Christian somebody is, or how heavy their faith is how many times are they in the building? How much do they put in the offering plate? That's absolutely, somebody lied to them. So no, I agree with you. And we don't know that, to that point of that logger you just mentioned, we don't know what conversations he's having in his alone time. He could be the most spiritual guy of anybody in that building for sure.
Well, I think a lot of those guys are, including myself, from the standpoint of, I talk to my kids a lot. Like when we're in the Missouri River breaks mule deer hunting, and I'm like, I don't know if there's a God. I don't know what
Look
that
at
God
this.
looks like.
Yeah.
I don't know, but man, look around.
Yeah.
Like what we're surrounded by is absolutely mind-bogglingly beautiful. And there's definitely
Yeah.
things with Mother Nature. I kind of tend to talk a lot about Mother Nature when we're
Right.
out in it. And honestly, just how fortunate we are. I've changed my views. I've become a little bit more open to understanding there is definitely also a lot of luck in life. Like the fact that I was born to two great parents in Lincoln, Montana, and not to two great people in the Sudan, and I have to work in a salt mine.
Yep.
Like, definitely where you're born is a complete stroke of luck somehow now, yeah, you can make it out of certain situations. If you're born in the inner city, you can make it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't like to sit and provide people too many excuses, but I was listening to Rogan's podcast, and he had a guy on that interviews people, the Soft White Underbelly channel on YouTube. And at first glance, he'd be interviewing somebody that you generally, and I still generally think, let's say a child molester, for example. He's interviewing this person, and my immediate reaction is, hang that bastard from a rope in Times Square, And then you start listening to him, he'll interview these people. And the first question he always asks, and this goes back to my original point, is what was your childhood like? What was your home life like?
Yeah.
And most of those people, 99 out of 100 had a childhood that most of us cannot imagine. And it starts at 2 years old, from being molested all the way through high school into their 20s, being molested by literally every person that's important in their life: mom, dad, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters. And they grew up in a way that by the time they're 25, 30, and they're getting caught doing whatever they're doing, it does start to make you, it's not an excuse, but it's definitely like more of a reason of like, oh, I can actually see how the path for that person, like they never had a chance.
How do I know I wouldn't have taken the same road, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just think you really are a product of your environment, and there's few exceptions. There's definitely a few. I worked with a guy that was an exception to that rule, that had basically every card stacked against him in life, and somehow he emerged out of it. But doesn't mean, and don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean for a second that I'm not for I just had a guy here yesterday that's he works for the feds investigating. Well, he investigates drug related trafficking and that kind of stuff here locally for the feds. His wife investigates child porn and abuse cases. That's all she works on, is child stuff. She's retiring at the end of this year because she hit her 20 years and she can't take another day of it. And I'm still of the mind that when something's happening to our children, those people need drug out in the street and shot. That being said, I actually have a little more perspective about how people got to where they are, and I have some sympathy for not the action that they're doing, but the way that they got there.
I think we can have compassion and sympathy without condoning behavior.
Right.
Well, I appreciate you going down that road with me for a little bit. I have a lot of other stuff to discuss with you, just because I'm just in such admiration of how you carry yourself and what you guys are accomplishing and what you're doing for people, and just your presence in the market that you're in, and how you got there. So, I mean, you've got 3 girls and you got a boy. I've got it the opposite. I've got 3 boys, and my last one was a daughter. So you got a pretty busy home with activities. I know they're involved in 4-H, and I know they're involved in sports. And I mean, your wife's an educator. I don't know how you must have more hours in the day than most people. But you just have to be more productive, right?
Well, I don't know.
Efficient.
I think we're all busy for sure, but it's I like that line, sleep when you're dead.
Yeah. Well, so you came up from some hardworking folks, right? I mean, your parents owned an excavation company, I believe, is what I remember. And I think you spent some time doing some of that kind of work. You were a lineman also, but we got to get back. I mean, a lot of kids have, trophies and medals and things they accomplished on an athletic field or at a spelling bee or whatever. But in your teenage years, you got some accomplishments that not everybody can say when it comes to being a bladesmith. Take us through a little bit, and this is where I'm going to kind of fall into the fold of how everybody talks to you and interviews you. So I'm not going to apologize for it, but I will say I do want to hear about you became a bladesmith, a journeyman bladesmith at 15, and then like the youngest master bladesmith at 19. That's when I hear the process of how that happens. I don't know how you made that happen, but tell us how, about the coach that sort of showed you the knives and the how you got into loving that work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of a natural progression with a podcast, just talk a little bit about history. I'm sure your listeners probably haven't heard. So, I was 11 years old. My little league baseball coach would bring his knives, hunting knives he was making to practice and show the parents. Being a little kid, I was obviously enamored by knives and hunting and really any of that kind of stuff. So my parents actually bought me one of his knives for Christmas that year. And then shortly thereafter, he invited me up to make one in his shop. And one turned into two or three. And it wasn't too long after that, he was probably trying to get rid of me, but he told me, if I want to be a knife maker, I have to have my own shop. And so I also had a lawn mowing business at that time. My mom would drag her, drag my little mower on her trailer behind, drop me off downtown. I'd mow for 2 or 3 hours, different businesses and individuals, and then she'd come pick me up. So I had that, and I worked in my parents' excavation business, like you said. And so I used that money to buy a belt grinder and then to start buying tools and equipment. And my dad was making a mess out of his shop. So he ended up helping me enclose a lean-to on a shed that we had. Kind of made me a little uninsulated lean-to to work in, where I could grind blades and kind of make a bunch of dirt and dust and have a spot. But it just kind of went from there. I mean, I really honestly, just something stuck in me. I don't know if it was the business side. Like, it's pretty cool when you're a kid and making a knife is fun. And then also selling it and getting money for it makes it extra fun. So like getting paid for your hobby was kind of amazing. So I sold my first couple knives to my math and science teachers for $20, which bought more belts so I could make more knives. I kind of did that. Like you say, I joined the American Bladesmith Society when I was 12. And then when I was 15, I passed the American Bladesmith Society's journeyman test. And that's a test that tests out, how good of a knife maker you are. Can you heat treat a blade? It has to be able to chop rope and 2x4s and boards in half and bend 90 degrees without breaking. Kind of shows that you know how to heat treat and the whole metallurgy side. And then once you do that, you have to present 5 knives to a panel of judges in Atlanta at the Blade Show. And they judge your fit and finish and how well you put those knives together. So I passed that when I was 15.
I was curious, did you have somebody was it the coach? Was it your parents that sort of facilitated you and nudged you in the way of understanding that there was even a bladesmith association or society and you could actually go get qualified and certified and have them compare your knives with other, not like, did you just know that was out there, or did someone say, hey, you're good at this, you like it, maybe you should try this?
No, maybe that was definitely all Rick Dunkerley was my coach, and he was the one that taught me. So cool. I think he saw something and he said early on, like, hey, if this is the path you want to go down, I think after the first year he saw like, wow, this kid hasn't quit yet. So I think I was 12 or 13. He was like, you should probably join, because if you actually continue and you get to this point, like, you could be the youngest journeyman to do it.
Cool.
So he educated me on that. My parents, they were very supportive, fully supportive, but they weren't, my dad was busy with his business. They weren't knife makers. This was all really, Rick and some other knife makers around the state that let me tag along to knife shows. You think back on it, and I really can say, like, I'd have turned out fine in life without knife makers and knife making. I had great parents, but the point is, when I look back on it and I now have kids that are that age, it's pretty amazing that he took that much interest in just another kid in town. And honestly, it's how I learned how to hunt. There were other grown men in town that taught me how to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
A guy by the name of Bruce West took me bow hunting a lot, and my
Mm-hmm.
uncle took me rifle hunting. Um,
Yeah.
it's it, we as men can't gloss over the impact that we can make just by taking, if you have a son that has a kid that's a friend of his that's asking a ton of questions about hunting or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that you do, if you're a welder or whatever, you just never know by inviting that kid to learn how to weld or to go hunt with you and your son. I'll be honest with you, it's something I should be better at myself,
Mm-hmm.
of like grabbing one of my kids' buddies and taking them. But you really have no idea how much that impact can, you spin this out 30 years later. I'm running a big knife company, all because a baseball coach in town invited me to come to a
Took an
shop.
interest. Yeah. And I mean, you became a master blacksmith at 19. I'm the youngest, at the time, the youngest to ever do that. Now, I will say, with all that momentum that you were having up until like 19 or so, one would think, oh, Josh just, the next couple of years, he started his company and boom, he's making knives, he's selling knives. You went almost another, 2 decades before you started Montana Knife Company. Is that accurate, roughly?
Yeah, once I graduated high school, the whole time I was kind of coming up in this, there were a bunch of knife makers that kept telling me, don't don't do this full time, right?
Mm.
Go get a good job. This is a hard way to make a living. And I kind of listened to them for a while until I was about 20 or 21. Closed on my first home that I bought. I was working excavation, and I'd moved. I wasn't for my parents. I was, my ex-wife and I had moved to where I'm at now. I had a job for a different company. And as soon as I closed on that, I went full time making knives because I just had to give it a shot. And, I did the custom knife making thing for about 10 years straight. It's a tough way to make a living. It's kind of a starving artist situation where, you make some knives, you go to a show, you hope you sell them. If you sell them all, you're kind of rich. And then a month later, you haven't made any more knives. And once you got home and paid all your bills, you're back to living paycheck to paycheck. It's a tough way to make a living. It's a tough way to ever really get ahead. I was somewhat jealous of, a buddy of mine I was teaching to make knives who had a 401k and paid vacation and, health insurance and all this stuff. And I'm like, man, like in order for me to afford all those things, I'd have to be making way more knives for a lot more money. So that being said, I had actually registered the name Montana Knife Company with the state of Montana when I was 19. I had the idea, but I definitely didn't have the know-how of how to run a production knife company. I also didn't, there were just a lot of reasons. There were personal reasons, there was business stuff, financially. But the whole time I was doing the custom knives, and then even when I became a lineman after I quit doing custom knives, I had this idea of MKC, and it really didn't come true until I got remarried. I'd been a lineman for about 8 or 9 years, and I was telling Jess about this idea of this company I wanted to build, and she was like, well, you should quit your job and do it. And I was like, well, slow down. We're not going to just quit our job yet today. But she definitely gave me the confidence, and frankly, the time. I was a single dad with 4 kids. I definitely didn't have the time to go try to build a company and also cook everyone dinner every night. So when I married her, everything kind of changed as far as like this became a reality because I had the support. And I'd reached a point in the knife making realm that I was fairly well known on the custom side. I think I had some experience. When you're 21 and you're 40, there's a difference in like maturity and who you are. You kind of know who you are. So yeah, I didn't launch MKC until I, was 39 years old. So it had been 20 years of thinking about MKC before I launched it.
Yeah. So in a perfect world, you're, maybe behind the scenes, you're in that 19 years of not giving up on that idea, one would think you're in there, developing SOPs, learning about maybe accounting and business and production and learning all these things. I mean, would you consider yourself, by the time you launched it, a business person? Like, did you consider yourself like I don't even know the name. I was going to say like a business genius or a
Not in the
stud business
least.
guy. Okay.
Not. I was a blue collar lineman and knife maker. I didn't know jack shit about running a company.
Yeah.
Uh, Not at all. In fact, I'm still learning like every single day. No, I started making some prototypes and kind of showing them around, and this was my idea. And then through a stroke of luck, I found my business partner, who I originally just hired to do some photography, and then he was like, "Well, I could build a website." I'm like, "Okay." And I started realizing that everything I was having him do, he just understood my goal and my mission, and he was really, really good. And I couldn't afford to pay him to do it to the level I needed to for the length of time. So I offered him partnership in it. And I was like, "Hey, if this goes, we both do well." Um, had some discussions around that. And then sure enough, he accepted. And then we kind of went for it. And then I was still a lineman then, working for the power company. So it was really January 1st of 2021. It was actually December 30th of 2020, the COVID year.
Yeah.
Things were really starting to go, and I needed one more day off from my normal job, and I was out of vacation. And I was like, "Yeah, but I need the 31st of December off. I have to go meet up with Thomas Rhett, the country music singer." And it was like, not going to happen, not going to happen. And then finally, I walked in there the morning of the 30th, and I said, "Well, if I can't get tomorrow off, then I'm going to have to quit." And so I quit my job. So January 1st of 21 is when we went after it. Now, this was 100% just me trying to figure it out. In August of 22, which is last year. So we went about a year and a half with me and Brandon and just a couple like employees assembling knives. We got to the size where I hired a director of operations from Amazon, Andrew, and he took a pay cut and really believes in the mission. He came in here, and I've learned a lot about business from him. He's built out a lot of the business side, the inventory tracking and just all that stuff. But honestly, I'm someone who's pretty easily admits what I don't know, but I'm pretty good at going and figuring it out or finding someone who does know.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the first step in like that whole process, is instead of saying like, "Yeah, I know," I'm the first one to say, "I don't know, but I'll go find somebody." And so I've done a really good job of building a team around me.
Yeah.
I guess I'm somewhat smart in ways, but I really kind of consider myself somewhat of a dummy. So
Well, I
somehow I
mean,
figured it out.
the people listening to this, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm using your words to describe my audience, but I'm saying a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, can relate to what you just said. And the fact that you've been on this rocket ship and drinking from a fire hose this whole time, or for a lot of this growth in the last year and a half, you were smart enough to realize you needed certain pieces of the puzzle when it came to people. I mean, without your wife and without, your guy that built the site and came in for a share of the company, I mean, you three, like that was a key part of this whole journey. Like 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about the guy that agreed to, he believed in you so much that he built the website and took a share of the business, and your wife pushed you out off the cliff, like that. That story's never going to die. I think that's huge for somebody listening. That's like, man, I got something here. I say bring in some people you trust, and bring in, you don't need 20 people at a boardroom table, but you need a couple people in your living room over a cup of coffee going, "Hey, I believe in this. What do you think?" Getting some ideas, and then basically locking arms, going shoulder to shoulder down the field. Man,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
what I was going to say about that is I think that's the difference between starting a business when you're 21 and when you're 31 or 39.
Hey, before we get back to the conversation here with our guest, I want to thank one of our sponsors, a new partner, Uncommon, which is a ministry that is equipping and empowering great men to become the husbands, the fathers, and leaders they were called to be. go to uncommon.org. That's UNCOMMEN.org. Check out their content. Go to YouVersion, download their devotionals. Great team, great people, great men, and they're out there for you. They're out there with great content, and they're out there to encourage us to be the men we were called to be. So I want to thank TJ and his team at Uncommon. So now let's get back to the conversation with our great guest here at Last in Line Podcast.
Admitting what you don't know and then going out and having the ability to find somebody that does know it and have them kind of buy into you. I feel like my job is somewhat as like a general manager of a football team where I don't have to be the quarterback necessarily. I don't even have to necessarily be the head coach. But you got to find all those right pieces that are really good at those positions and be able to analyze them, push them. But also, like, if you find the right people, you don't even really have to push them. I want people that are like all in for the mission. I don't have to babysit or push, but definitely, I think when I was younger, I probably would have tried to do all like the marketing myself. But I knew, and I told my business partner when I met up with him, if I'm going to grow one of the largest knife companies in the country, all you have to do is go look at every company that's out there and look at their hiring chart. And they have a director of operations. They have a marketing team. They have an accounting team, finance team, whatever. I knew I'd have to have those people, and the first thing that you have to do when you make something is you have to be able to sell it.
Right.
And so to me, the first person I needed to find, not a director of operations, I needed to find a marketing person.
Yeah.
That could help on that side. And I definitely had the expertise. Obviously, I was more on the product side, developing the knives. I guess I was somewhat the quarterback in that sense, doing a lot of the work myself. I do think sometimes people make a mistake where they feel like they have to go out with this business plan and present it and go get a bunch of money from a bunch of people invested. And now you immediately have pressure.
Yeah.
I didn't take any debt on, and I didn't go out and like take an investment. None of that. My deal was I already felt I was putting my family a bit at risk by quitting my job to chase my dream. The last thing I was going to do is then double down on it and borrow a ton of money. So, and I also knew that no one was going to understand what I wanted to do better than me. So if you bring on investment right off the bat, probably no one would have invested because I didn't have a great like business plan strategy. It was all in my head. And number two, even if I did, then they're going to want to start seeing immediate returns. And you have to make choices when you do that don't, to me, grow the business organically.
Yeah.
We would have started throwing a ton of money at maybe advertising campaigns that wouldn't have been as authentic as what we did. Is we made a bunch of knives and we gave them to a bunch of people that we thought were badasses.
Yeah.
And just said, no strings attached, use them. And it just started to and that was the seed that we put in the dirt, and it started to grow. And then we started watering that and started growing it, and putting a little fertilizer on it.
That's smart.
Just letting one drop of knives pay for the next, instead of making 2,000 knives, I made 200. Once we sold them, we made 400, and we just start expanding it that way.
Guys like me wishes you'd have made the 2,000 and just wishes you to start making about 10,000. But no, I know that's a great problem to have, is never being able to keep enough knives in stock. But so I guess what I think people do sometimes when they start businesses is they always have sort of this contingency or like the kind of a plan B of what if this doesn't work, or what if, okay, we plan, let's just have modest, 8 or 10% growth in our first year. Rarely do people go, hey, we're going to grow 100% in 12 months. And I don't know your numbers, but I'm guessing it's been a lot more than 10% growth in 12 months. So what do you say to people on plan for success? Like, when you start this, if you believe in it, you've got kind of a sample size big enough to go on and say, look, we got a track record of success. What do you say to them about, dude, shoot, aim high, raise the bar? I mean, have you done that to this point?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both is smart. I get people DMing me and asking me questions and like, hey, I'm thinking of quitting my job and I'm gonna chase the dream just like you did it. And I'm like, okay. And then they start asking me questions and I'll be like, well, what are you doing right now at night or
Mm,
in the morning? And it's like, or what's your business look like now? How much money are you making off of it? And it's like, well, nothing. I gotta quit my job and do it. And it's like, bro, you have to burn the candle. And, though I felt like I was putting my family a little bit at risk, I was also being pushed for months before that to quit my job by my own wife. And we were selling knives and we were building. Um, I talked to a guy the other day, it blew me away, but I won't say in exactly what he's trying to do it in, but
right.
he quit his job. He has no income coming in. He's trying to build this business and he's borrowed money like 3 different times now. His sales are absolutely dead flat. He's asking me marketing questions and he's really worried that like if with his sales and stuff, he's going to lose his home. And I was like, so do you have a job? And he's like, no. And I'm like, you need to go get a damn job, dude. Like you have to take care of your family and pay your bills first. And the way to me you build something like the way I did it is you start doing it after work. You sleep very little. You get up, you get your ass out of bed in the morning. You skip hunting season. You skip family vacations if you can't go on them. Everyone has to be all in. And if you can't do that, if your spouse doesn't want to support that, that's also a red flag because this is going to be very difficult. Like everyone has to be all in, the kids, the wife, to everybody, right?
Hmm.
Um, but initially, I think you have to be putting in work and proving that this can be successful while you still have a paycheck. And then, yeah, once you quit that job, to me,
Yeah.
that's the point you have to pour the gas on the fire, straight
Yeah.
up high octane gas on the fire. And that being said, we could have been very greedy and we could have tried to do what you said and go over the top and cut 10,000 blades,
Right.
but we had used all of our capital on a total gamble. And even today, we could go out and we could cut, say 10 times what we have cut right now and try to make it go. But is it really worth gambling the success of the business on a flip of a coin? With the economy we're in, with everything. Again, I think people get a little bit greedy. I am totally happy
Yeah.
building in a sustainable way. Now, to your point, I mean, in the year one, my goal, I told the insurance company when we were trying to get business insurance, I wanted to do 100,000 and, we did 1.9 that year,
Wow.
and
I
then the
don't doubt
next
it.
year we grew by 4 times and we're trying to
Yeah.
grow again by double.
Yeah.
Um, my initial goal was to double every year, 100 grand to 200
Yeah.
grand, 200 to 400, 400 to 800. And to me, in 10 years, you have a phenomenal company, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's a sustainable growth rate.
Yeah.
Granted, most companies, you mentioned the 10%. Yeah, if you're a $25 million company, that's a
Right.
pretty good growth rate.
Yeah.
But when you're zero in the beginning, to me, it was more about trying to double each year.
Yeah, no, that's smart. I mean, and you've got reason to believe that's possible. I mean, it's not a secret that you could probably do what you said, even though I know you're being conservative and a little closer to the vest on some of your forecasts, but you could, I mean, from what I can tell, you could sell pretty much every knife you ever cut for probably a year out if you took a waiting list. But I just want to know, like, I don't know where you rank on knife companies. I don't really, I mean, I know we're not really going into that, but let's say, I mean,
I don't even know. I don't. It's
somebody
like
wants to come, say the biggest dog on the block wants to come buy MKC in 5 years. I mean, is that something? Because what makes you guys, to me, what makes you valuable is that unique, that niche, that MKC, man. That's what makes it, is just that whole character of what the fabric of that company is. I mean, would you tell them to jump in a lake? I mean, no, never say never, but I think you're probably wanting to hold on to some of that, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit it with the never say never. I mean, I'm old enough now to kind of say never say never. That
Yeah.
being said, um, no one's going to be able to offer me enough money right now that would make any kind of business sense for them to run a company after that.
Yeah.
Uh, there again, if you want to come offer me $200 million today, well, I'll probably take it and go do something.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're talking ridiculous money, right? But the point is, I live a really great life from the standpoint of I live in Montana. My kids go to a good, just public school here. We get to hunt and fish. I have a nice spot. Um, I don't have a ton of money in savings or in the bank for retirement someday. Hopefully we build that up. But
Right.
I live a real great life. And honestly, if you gave me $20 million tomorrow and said you're done working, go do whatever, I'd probably go have fun for a few months. I'd probably schedule some hunts, and I can guarantee you by this time next year, I'd be going bonkers.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'd have to do something. And I would much rather measure my success by how many generations can my family run this company. I would way rather hand my kids a $50 million knife company than $50
Right.
million cash.
Nice.
They have to still continue to operate it, be business people, work hard.
Yeah.
I have, to be quite frank, we have people trying to buy us, that have
Right.
offered, that want to buy, that want to
Yeah.
have that discussion. And I won't even have the discussion.
No.
I'm not even interested in what number they're thinking because it just doesn't matter to me right
No.
now. And honestly, if we got to that point that our company was worth $100 million to somebody, well, then I'm probably making enough money to go do what I want to do anyway.
Right.
Why would I want to get rid of it? Because this is what I do. I've done it since I was 11.
Yeah.
If I had started a shirt company, like a brand, and it was Under Armour 2.0, yeah, fine. I don't know that I would probably be as passionate about that, but I've made
Right.
knives since I was 11.
Yeah.
And we want to be generational. I truly want to take care of these knives for generations. Nothing would make me happier than if my great grandson was sharpening your great grandson's knife that you passed down to him. Like that would be pretty cool.
Dude, I 100% co-sign and stamp approval. Not that you need it on what you just said, because I mean, the country that we live in, if more people thought about generational legacy and things that dollar signs don't necessarily impact, we might be better off. And the fact that you can pass that down, and I was going to ask you that if your kids had a desire to, kind of inherit, and be part of that business and run it someday. I mean, you kind of answered that's what your intentions are. You're not going to force feed it to them, but I mean, I can think about, out of the 4 kids you have, I don't know why some of them wouldn't want to get on board with that. And especially when you build it from the grassroots, like you've done.
Yeah. And I definitely would love them to go out and have some life experience, some struggle, go do their own thing. My senior in high school, or my freshman in college, seems to be doing that. She's kind of pursuing her own path. Doesn't seem to have a lot of interest in like taking the business over on, even though she's working for us part-time right now. I want, feels like my son has more interest in being involved someday, but he's 14. He likes to hunt. So why wouldn't he at this point? Right.
Sure.
My other daughter's talking about wanting to be a doctor or a nurse. But they have
Nice.
plenty of time in life. Like she could go be a nurse, and when she's 35, decide she wants to come back in here and, start working in the marketing department. And, when I'm 65. So, I mean, I have no rush. In fact, I think it would help them appreciate what's going on a little bit more, especially if this gets more successful. Ultimately, I'm sure there'll be somebody from the family down the road that wants to be involved. But I've told them all too, they have to start from the bottom. My daughter's bead blasting and packaging, and they all have to start from the bottom and work their way up. And honestly, I'd rather them go get some life experience and come back when they're 30 years old and have had some struggle.
That way
But
it's their
I
choice, and it's not just kind of a by default choice made for them. That way they go out and then they're like, okay, I know what I don't want. And then they kind of come back to home base, right?
Yeah, and I'd be super stoked if all 4 of them went out and went to work and figured out their own path in life and just crushed it. And none of them decided to be involved. I mean, as long as they are successful in doing what they love, like that's
Mm-hmm.
great. Somebody else, we can figure out the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it to me, it really is, it's cool running a brand in such a small town. Like, we're the largest postal customer here now. We have been for the last year. We're hiring people.
Yeah.
We've only just begun to scratch the surface. It's funny you say you don't know the size of these other knife companies. I generally don't know either, but I know a lot of them have 400 or 500 employees. We have like 17. So I'm excited because that tells me we still have a ton of growth to do. Like, we're just getting
Right.
started.
Right. Well, I
And to
wonder,
make knives in America, it's a
oh
big
yeah.
deal to me.
Oh yeah. And please don't ever change that. I was going to ask you this earlier and I've kind of forgot, but you mentioned the word mission. What is the mission of Montana? Like, if you were to sum it up in a few sentences, I mean, I can obviously go to the website and it might be there in, mission statement, but in your mind, what was the desire? What was the goal when you said, I'm going to be this guy? What did you want? Did you see like a niche vacancy in the space? Like, what was the mission? What is the mission?
Yeah, I mean, our slogan is kind of working knives for working people. And honestly, that's what it bothered me for a long time when I was making high-end customs, that I'd go into a store and I'd see these guys going and spending their hard-earned money to try and find a good, solid using knife. And they were made in China or made overseas. They weren't made well. They weren't made to, like, use and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
As nobody was standing behind their stuff. I personally, uh, my goal or my mission for a company is to make a knife that's a part of their gear that they end up passing down. And it
Nice.
bothers me, the throwaway blade perspective, of the replaceable blade knife. In theory, I understand it in a certain way with certain people, like guides who are in a hurry and just trying to go fast and use a different blade and whatnot. But, like, as men, generally, we only ever pass down two things: knives and guns.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I will say there's a couple other things, artwork and jewelry,
Maybe a watch.
right?
Yeah. Right.
Maybe a watch. Women, it's jewelry, right? Necklaces, rings, that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. Artwork for men and women. Um, Maybe a classic car or something, but I would argue today classic cars is dead, from the standpoint of classic, meaning, is there going to be a car today they're making with all
It's
these
not
computers
computers. Yeah.
that we're going to be able to, that your great great grandson's going to be able to rebuild and get running?
Mm-mm.
um
No.
so all of a sudden we went from passing that stuff down to throwing it away, which the whole throwaway society just bothers me in general, the amount of
Mm-hmm.
waste. I'm not quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote a wacko environmentalist, but I think as a hunter, kind of all environmentalists in a way.
Yep.
And just everything you see in Target, when you walk in the front door and you look around, everything's made to throw away.
Yep.
And that bothers me.
Keep you
So
coming back, right? That's what it's for.
yeah, so I really want to provide a useful tool for generations, and
It's good.
provide a good experience, something that you can put memories in, that you can then tell your kid down the road, like, I went on a caribou hunt in Alaska, with this knife, and I want you to have it, type
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah. And by the way, those will last 200 years, what you're making, or longer.
Yeah.
I'm curious because you mentioned so early in your career, your baseball coach was kind of a mentor and kind of an encourager that got you in this. But have you guys thought about, excuse me if I'm ignorant in this because I haven't done the research, but have you thought about creating maybe a Montana Knife mentorship program or maybe a scholarship program, or where you guys could be that for somebody when there's a kid out there that's watching and it could be 10 years from now, I don't know, but watching your story, watching your journey, and they're like, wow, that's the American dream. And I love knives. How do I get to be a part of something like this? I don't know. Have you thought of something like that?
It's interesting. I've been trying to figure out, about how to build a little bit of a network of knife makers that I could use to pass names on, because we get a ton of people requesting and asking about classes and this and that. And I would like to put a few classes on, but there's no way I could reach everybody.
No.
There's a few knife makers out there for sure that I generally tend to suggest. Yes, we've talked about the scholarship thing, the mentorship thing. As we grow a little bit more, there's the American Bladesmith Society puts on some schools and things like that. We would love to help give out some scholarships and push people towards that. So you kind of yes to all that. We've been talking about it. We're just young. We're working right now in the conservation side and also in the veteran side. We did a veterans event here. We're going to do another one, and then we're working with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Mule Deer Foundation, some of those. So, but no, I love the idea, and I think that's honestly, it's just a bit of a bandwidth issue at the moment.
Yeah, I would imagine. And like I said, it's probably a fast forward topic. Probably put a pin in it till you guys get more legs under you in certain other areas. I'd be interested to know if you've talked to Mighty Oaks Foundation and Chad Robichaux and those guys, because I know they do a lot in the veteran community. I know you work with Mike Glover and those guys and Black Rifle Coffee. What are the chances? And I know there's a lot of probably politics and maybe legal matters, but will we ever see a Montana Knife in a Black Rifle Coffee store?
Well,
that would be nice.
We have apparel in the brand new Black Rifle store in Kalispell.
Okay, you got apparel, right?
We're putting together a case right now for that as well, to put knives in there.
Okay.
And then the discussion is right now, how that works there about then potentially, copying those cases for other stores around the country.
Yeah.
And then we're also working, with them very early preliminary. Evan and I talked about it this weekend. We have a bag design done about like a Black Rifle coffee, MKC coffee.
Oh, nice.
But that would be something that'll probably come out till fall. But yeah, cool. No, we're Evan and I chatted about it quite a bit this weekend, so that's in the works.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, I have one more kind of serious like business question for you, and then one other one after that, and then I'll let you go. But what are I guess when people start to grow and you really kind of keep the main thing. I know you guys branched out a little bit in the culinary cutlery department recently, but a lot of it's just kind of everyday use, right? Hunting, outdoors stuff. At what point do people get out over their skis because they think they need to diversify just for the sake of diversification? Like, are y'all planning to kind of stay in your lane with this and the knife situation? Like, is there another line maybe that you guys are thinking of something different along the outdoor space? Or you could go another bunch of directions in the blade space too, obviously, but is it better just to kind of stay in your wheelhouse of organic growth? Or like talk to a guy that may be now a business guy that's thinking, oh, we got to diversify. We got to, just for the sake of saying, I got another page in my catalog.
Yeah, I think to your point, initially focusing on the core, focusing on your brand is super important. We have to do that often. I'm probably the worst one at coming up with ideas, or we could do this or that. We have a lot of people throwing ideas at us right now. And definitely having some focus in like, what's your core? What's your mission? Have that mission statement and kind of continue going back to that. Does this help us accomplish the mission? That being said, we absolutely have, I'll talk you through a little bit of it, like how we're looking at it right now. Yes, there's all these other knives we want to make, right? Culinary, tactical, folding knives, the everyday carry folding knife stuff, things like that, right? Fishing and more of the deep seas type stuff. But our initial focus is being the best hunting knife company we can be, right? And providing the best hunting knife. So that means more knives, more hunting knives, putting more and more emphasis and focus into marketing and figuring out how to get every hunter in the country. That being said, we also want to curate the stuff over here on the side, like the tactical line of knives or something like that, or cooking, with the chef's knives. But we also don't want to just take all our focus away. So I think building that initial solid core and then starting to put some resources towards it, but don't take all resources and just forget what got you there. We've talked about other stuff down the road about, some of the best gear, adding some gear to our website. I think we have some credibility. So we want to be careful that when we do launch a piece of gear, that it's super high quality. So if it is completely off of the beaten path from a knife, that at least our customer can trust that it's of the highest quality.
Yeah, and yeah, even like a med kit for practical use in the hunting realm or something out in in a deer stand or something. I don't know, but yeah, something along that. I was going to say, it was funny that you mentioned your daughter wants to be a nurse. I was thinking that might not be bad to have one of those around with a knife, a bunch of knives laying around, because I know you had a little mishap with your son, and he's got a pretty cool scar there to tell a story, right?
Yeah, I cut him pretty good out hunting a couple years ago. So right across the top of the hand.
I mean,
it can happen.
It happens. Well, I appreciate you being here, man. What do you say to those that maybe are experiencing similar type of hockey stick growth that you are, and how you're going to stay humble? Because you're already kind of seem like a down to earth, humble guy, but none of this, the lights and glamour and notoriety really get to you. It doesn't seem like. But what about the guy that maybe get it might be a little tantalizing for him, all the status, all the fame, all the money and those kinds of things? How do you stay humble? What's your recommendation for that guy?
Well, my kids definitely, they make fun of me plenty, and my employees and everyone around me. So that's not really too much of a problem. But I definitely, when you struggle as long as I did to kind of like figure out how to make something go, or to make money off of your passion, like the knives, and then have to kind of somewhat go away from it when I went and did my lineman stuff. And then you come back to it, there's definitely that feeling of like, man, if I ever do make it, I'm never going to take it for granted. And I tell my employees all the time, if it's a sellout on a drop or whatever, I'm as nervous and excited for every drop as I was on the first one. And I'm just as appreciative, if not more. I've seen flash in the pan stuff before. It scares me. Like, quite honestly, I think a lot of the pressure is like, gosh, I just don't want to screw this up. I don't want to be that dummy that like somehow messed it up. So, staying lean, staying humble, and quite honestly, like, that's the thing about like selling the company, right? Like, we're all gonna basically die naked, and doesn't matter what our bank account says. So like, ultimately, like I say, if I can live a great life and live in the house that I'm in the rest of my life and pay my bills and go on some cool hunts, the money part, I just don't really care. And I've never been in that position. Even today, I'm not, my company might be worth a fair amount of money, I guess, if I sold it. So I guess technically today, I could probably have millions of dollars, right, if I sold my company. But so I've never been in that position, but I always kind of thought this way. And I think it proves today that, like, even though I guess I'm somewhat in that position, though I'm not, my bank account definitely doesn't say millions. It just isn't, it doesn't define a person. And it definitely doesn't, I don't think it would change my life that much, quite frankly. I absolutely love coming into the office every day, seeing our employees. I'm having a blast. I think staying humble, and honestly too, like I said, we have 17 employees. I mean, my goal is 500, so we haven't even begun hardly.
Yeah.
And to me, that's super exciting. And even at 100, we're not even 20% there. Right. So we got a long ways to go. So I think keeping that hunger and keeping that excitement, but also being appreciative of where we've come. I don't want to make it sound like I'm not.
Yeah.
If we only grow to 30 and we're making a great living and it just isn't sustainable to like grow anymore, but we can just do well at 30, then that's what we'll do. Like,
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, it sounds like, I was going to ask, when do you feel like you're out of the woods on that whole, I don't want to be the guy that screws this up type of deal? I mean, I don't know if someone in your position ever feels comfortable. I mean, that probably is the enemy of growth. But to keep your ego honest, I mean, it sounds like you gotta be grateful because you remember where you were, but you also gotta just kind of acknowledge, hey, we're doing pretty well, and let's keep this thing rolling and keep doing what we're doing. But ultimately, it sounds like you guys are serving, and this podcast is about servant leadership and how to stay a leader, but also how to serve well. And it sounds like your whole reason for existing is to serve a community that finds your product useful, and that will never die, and that will never get boring. It'll never expire, and so I think that'll help with kind of staying on the grind and staying humble.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I definitely do think, over a fashion trend of a shirt or a hat, I definitely think what we're doing is, there's always some new little boy or girl getting into hunting or fishing. There's people every day that are becoming outdoorsmen and women. There's people every day that are starting to put more emphasis on wanting to support their country and buy American made products. And I don't think it'll ever get old to people that we do stuff here in the U.S. I love being able to give back. We gave 70 grand last year to the flood victims, down to the people that were generally, we directed that towards a flood relief for farmers and ranchers.
Oh yeah.
There's things that we get to do that I never thought I'd get to do. So that to me, that's the coolest thing.
That's so good. And it'll come back tenfold. Well, all right, man. Thank you very much. And literally, if this was a restaurant, I'd have to just say, look, my order is going to be, I need a Blackfoot, a Speed Goat, and a Super Cub, all in black, and I need it yesterday. Other than that, man, I appreciate your company. I appreciate who you are and what you represent. You're a family guy first too, and I love that. So with that, he has been Josh Smith. We have been Last in Line. Be blessed.